The baseball game was over. The lights above Wayford Field were still on. Parents were gathering their things. Kids were running back toward the bleachers. It was a normal end to a normal summer night in a small Arkansas town. Except Colleen Nick stood in the parking lot, realizing the silence was much too heavy. Morgan, nothing. She called again, louder this time. Still nothing. And in that silence, broken only by the sound of other families laughing, packing up, heading home, something cold moved through her chest. The kind of feeling every mother knows, the kind you pray you never feel. She started moving faster. This was supposed to be a girls' night out. It was Friday, June 9th, 1995. Warm, humid, kind of Arkansas summer evening where the air smells like cut grass and the fireflies come out just after dark. Colleen had been invited by close friends to watch a Little League game in Alma, a small town about 30 miles from their home in Ozark. She almost didn't go. Alma wasn't a town she knew, but her friend said, "Come on, it'll be fun, bring Morgan." So, she did. Before we go any further, you need to understand who Morgan was. Not the missing child on the flyer, not the case file, the real girl. It was so small that when she fell asleep in the car, Colleen could still lift her with one arm. She had blonde hair and bright blue eyes. And when she smiled, really smiled, you could see 5 tiny silver caps on her back molars. Little flashes of light in a 6-year-old's mouth. She had decided with complete seriousness that bubblegum was its own food group, not candy, bubblegum. This was her position, and she was sticking to it. She wanted to be a circus performer when she grew up, but also a doctor. Her mother never told her to pick one. At night, she would sit with her little brother Logan and her baby sister Taryn and read them bedtime stories, sounding out every word slowly, carefully like the job mattered, because to her, it did. She had picked out her own kitten. She was very proud of that. She was somebody's big sister, somebody's whole world. And on the night of June 9th, she pulled on her green Girl Scout t-shirt, her blue denim shorts, her white tennis shoes, and climbed into the car next to her mum, probably talking the whole way there. They arrived at Wayford Field. Around 300 people had shown up. Families from Alma and the surrounding towns all settled into the bleachers under the stadium lights. Colleen found her friends and sat down. Morgan watched the game for a while, the way kids do, half interested, half somewhere else in her head. Then she spotted 2 kids she knew playing near the parking lot. At around 10:30, she turned to her mother and asked if she could go catch fireflies with them. Colleen said no. She didn't know this town. It was dark. Morgan was 6 years old, but the parents around her smiled and said, "The kids always play out there during games. It's totally fine. It's Alma. Nothing ever happens here." Those 5 words would sit in Colleen's chest for the next 29 years. Nothing ever happens here. She looked at her daughter's face, hopeful, bright, already halfway gone in her imagination to wherever the fireflies were. She said yes. For about 15 minutes, Colleen kept one eye on the game and one eye on the small green shirt moving through the dark near the parking lot. Morgan was out there with the other kids. She was fine. Everything was fine. Then the game ended. Players jogged back toward the stands. The crowd stood up. People began drifting toward the parking lot in that slow end of the evening shuffle. Colleen looked toward the field. The 2 kids were walking back. Morgan wasn't with them. She told herself it was nothing. Morgan probably wandered back on her own. She was probably already at the car. She wasn't. Colleen stood there for a moment, just one moment before her body started moving without being told to. Back to the field, back to the parking lot, through the crowd, calling her name. Morgan, Morgan. The other families kept moving around her unaware. The stadium lights hummed above, and somewhere in the grass nearby, the fireflies Morgan had gone to catch kept blinking, quiet and small and completely indifferent to what had just happened. She found the 2 children and grabbed them. "Where is she?" "Where's Morgan?" the kids explained. When the game ended, they had all stopped near the parking lot to shake the sand out of their shoes. Morgan leaned against a car to do the same. The kids finished, turned around, started walking back toward the bleachers. Morgan wasn't behind them. They assumed she had gone ahead. They didn't think anything of it. But then, almost as an afterthought, one of the kids mentioned something else. While they were playing, there had been a man near the parking lot standing beside a red pickup truck. He wasn't watching the game, he was watching the children. At some point he had walked over, he had said something to Morgan. And now, Morgan was gone. The friends came back, Morgan didn't. And what those children remembered about that man, the way he looked, what he drove, what he said, would become the only thread investigators had to pull. The question was whether it would be enough, because when police arrived 6 minutes later and began piecing together the timeline, they realized something that made the whole thing feel even darker. This man hadn't wandered into that parking lot by accident. The way he had positioned himself, the way he had watched, the way he had moved, it all pointed to one thing. He had come there with a plan. Police arrived in 6 minutes, and those 6 minutes were already too late. By the time the first officer stepped out of his car, the parking lot was half empty. Families were pulling out, headlights sweeping across the grass. People who had spent the evening cheering for their kids, now moving fast, heads down, wanting to get home. Somewhere in that confusion, a red truck had already left, and Morgan Nick had left with it. What followed was controlled chaos. Flashlights cutting across the dark field, radio static crackling through the warm night air. Officers splitting up, moving fast, checking the tree line, the road, the open ground beyond the parking lot. Parents who had been packing up their cars 10 minutes ago now stood completely still, watching, some pulling their own children close without realizing they were doing it. Colleen stood in the middle of all of it, not screaming, not moving, just completely still. The way a person goes still when reality has not yet caught up with what their body already knows. The officers needed to speak to the children, the two kids who had been with Morgan, the ones who had seen the man. They were young, but what they remembered was exact. There had been a man standing near the edge of the parking lot, not passing through, not watching the game, just standing beside a truck watching the children play. One of them would later describe him to investigators using a single word. Creepy. A child's word, but precise. At some point during those 15 minutes, he had walked over toward Morgan. He had spoken to her, his voice carrying what the children described as a country accent. They couldn't recall the exact words, but they remembered that he had no shirt on, just jeans, standing shirtless in a parking lot at nearly 11 at night, watching children chase fireflies. That detail alone made investigators' skin crawl. From the children's accounts, police built a composite. White male, mid-20s to late 30s, around 6 feet tall, medium to solid build, short beard with grey showing through, a moustache, dark hair. He looked, by all accounts, completely ordinary, which made him more frightening, not less. But it was the truck that investigators kept coming back to. Red, old, a mid-1980s pickup, with paint faded by years of Arkansas sun. On the back, a white camper shell. And here is where it got strange. The shell was too short, 4 to 5 inches too short for the truck bed it was sitting on, slightly off kilter, like it had been taken from a different vehicle entirely. The right rear corner looked possibly damaged. It did not look like the camper of someone who went fishing on weekends. It looked like something placed there with a specific purpose. Because a camper shell that size, even a short one, is completely enclosed. No windows on the sides, a door at the back that latches from the outside, dark inside. It could hold an adult without anyone knowing. It could hold a child without anyone hearing a sound. By morning, the search had swallowed the entire region. The FBI and Arkansas State Police joined. Helicopters swept low over the fields outside Alma. Search dogs worked outward from the parking lot in slow, methodical grids, using Morgan's belongings to hold the scent. Hundreds of volunteers showed up without being asked. Neighbors, strangers, people who had simply seen the news and driven to Alma because sitting at home felt like giving up. And through the town, something quiet and heartbreaking began to appear. Pink ribbons tied around tree trunks, knotted to mailboxes, looped around light poles along every street in Alma and back in Ozark, where Morgan lived. Pink because it was her favorite color. People wore them pinned to their clothing. Entire streets lined with them, a wordless, collective refusal to move on. Colleen refused to go home that first night. She stayed at the fire station, unwilling to be anywhere that wasn't close to where her daughter had last been seen. Within 3 days, 2 more reports came in from western Arkansas that made investigators go cold. In one case, a woman stepped out of a laundromat to find a man in a red pickup truck trying to get her 4-year-old daughter to come closer. He drove off the moment he saw the mother. In another town, a man matching the description was reported for another suspicious interaction in a nearby town. She got away and ran. Same build, same truck, same behavior. This was not a single impulsive act. This was someone who had done this before and was still out there, still moving, still looking. Over the weeks and months that followed, the tips came in by the hundreds, then the thousands. The total number of leads eventually worked in this case would cross 10,000. Every red pickup truck in the region was checked. Nearly 250 sightings were reported across Arkansas and neighboring states. Every single one was followed up on. Every single one hit a wall. The composite sketch ran on national television. America's Most Wanted. Unsolved mysteries. Thousands of calls flooded the tip lines. 0 arrests, 0 charges, 0 answers. Then about 2 weeks after Morgan vanished, a call came in from Stuttgart, a town nearly 3 hours from Alma. A man claimed he had seen someone on his property trying to break into his car. The intruder ran, but as he ran, the witness said he had a little girl with him, holding her hand. He looked at the composite sketch. He said, "That's him." Police moved immediately. A 10-square-mile search area was locked down, officers on foot, helicopters back in the air, dogs brought in. And Colleen Nick got in her car and drove, because when someone tells you your daughter might be 3 hours away, you don't wait. You go. She arrived. She waited. 16 hours she stood in Stuttgart while officers worked every street, every yard, every field in that search zone. They found nothing. Then came the second blow. Investigators sat the witness down again. He shifted in his chair. His story changed in small ways, then larger ones. They ran a polygraph, then a second one. Both came back the same way. Deception indicated. He eventually admitted the truth. He had seen someone near his car, but there was no girl. He had invented that part entirely. He couldn't explain why. He was arrested for filing a false report. 16 hours, a full operation, and Colleen Nick drove home with nothing but silence and 3 more hours of road. After Stuttgart, the investigation settled into something worse than chaos. Quiet tips slowed. Physical evidence remained non-existent. The red truck had vanished as completely as Morgan herself. Investigators kept working for months, then years. But the honest truth was that every path they had was narrowing. It looked, by every measure, like this case might never break. And then one day, without warning, a man walked into a police station. He sat down across from an investigator. And in a room that suddenly went very still, he said 3 words. "I did it." The man who walked in was 36 years old. He was deaf. He spoke through an interpreter. And what he told investigators, sitting across a table, calm, specific, detailed, made every officer in that room lean forward. He said he had been at Wayford Field that night. He said he had taken Morgan. He said he remembered waking up the next morning with blood on his clothes. And when he turned on the television and saw the coverage, Morgan's face, her green shirt, the parking lot, he had taken those clothes outside and burned them. Then he paused, and he said something that made the room go very still. "I felt that I did it. Not I know I did it. Not I remember doing it. He felt that he did it." That single word "felt" should have been a warning. But in that moment, after more than a year of nothing, investigators were already moving. Search warrants were obtained within hours. From his home and vehicle, officers removed 22 items, a pink toothbrush, along with several suspicious tools and materials found in his possession. Everything went to the FBI. For a brief moment, the first in over a year, it felt like the nightmare was ending. The community exhaled. People allowed themselves carefully to believe it might be over. Then, investigators released him. The forensic results weren't back yet. Without confirmation, they had no legal ground to hold him. He walked out the door and went home. The outrage was immediate and loud. People couldn't understand how a man who had confessed could simply leave. Police explained the legal reality. A confession without physical evidence wasn't enough, and moving too fast could destroy any future prosecution. But in a town that had been searching for a little girl for over a year, legal explanations felt like cold comfort. Colleen Nick watched all of this quietly. He was the only person in the world who knew the exact shape of Morgan's absence, what it felt like, what it sounded like in a house that used to have her in it, and something in her, something that operated below logic, below evidence, below anything she could fully explain, told her this man had not taken her daughter. She said it publicly. She said it carefully. She said, even if he is guilty, Morgan is not home. Stopping the search now would be the most dangerous thing anyone could do. Months passed. The FBI results came back. Nothing connected. The pink toothbrush, not Morgan's. The hair, inconclusive. The stains, not what anyone had hoped. The case against him collapsed entirely. Colleen had been right. She could have gone home after that, closed the curtains, let the grief become something private and quiet. Instead, in January 1996, she stood in a room at the White House while President Clinton signed an executive order requiring missing children's photographs to be posted in federal facilities across the country. She had helped push for it. They had made calls, told Morgan's story, refused to let the momentum die. Then she came home to Arkansas and built something. She closed her own business, the one she had run before June 9th, 1995, before her life split cleanly into before and after. And she founded the Morgan Nick Foundation, not a memorial, a working organization. One that sent trained volunteers to search sites, supported families in the first desperate hours of a disappearance, worked directly with law enforcement, and taught children across the state about personal safety. She turned her grief into infrastructure. That same year, Arkansas renamed its missing child alert system the Morgan Nick Amber Alert. Her daughter's name became the word that went out every time a child was in danger in that state. Morgan was still missing, but her name was now protecting other children. Years moved forward, the way they do when there is no resolution, not quickly, not cleanly, just relentlessly. By 2002, Logan and Taryn, the little ones Morgan used to read bedtime stories to, were in school. They had their own friends, their own routines, their own lives slowly taking shape. The world kept moving, but in every photograph, every birthday, every first day of school, there was a space where an older sister should have been. Morgan had stayed 6 years old while everyone around her grew up. In January 2002, police received a tip so specific about a property in Booneville, Arkansas, that they obtained a search warrant and brought in cadaver dogs. They dug through the night. They found nothing. They left and said they did not intend to return. In November 2010, federal investigators traveled to a vacant house in Spiro, Oklahoma. A tip had connected the property to someone of interest. They searched for DNA evidence. They found nothing that moved the case forward. In December 2017, they went back to the same Spiro property. This time, the cadaver dogs alerted to something specific, a spot in the yard that suggested something might be buried beneath the surface. Forensic pathologists from the state medical examiner's office came in. They excavated the ground an inch at a time. They went deeper, then deeper still. They hit bedrock at 2 feet. No well, no evidence, nothing. The FBI released a statement saying they were fully confident the search had been thorough, that nothing had been missed. Colleen read it and went back to work. By the summer of 2019, the case had been open for 24 years. The original investigators had long since retired. The tip lines had gone quiet. The red truck with the ill-fitting camper shell remained unidentified. A generation of Arkansas children had grown up knowing Morgan's name without knowing her face. It looked in every honest way like this was the shape the case would keep forever. Then, a lieutenant named Brett Hartley sat down at his desk and did something that sounds almost embarrassingly simple. He pulled out the original case files from 1995. Not a new lead, not new technology, the actual first reports, the yellowed pages, the handwritten notes, the witness interviews from those first hours in the Wayford Field parking lot. He started at the beginning and he read. And on one of those pages, Buried under 24 years of other names, other leads, other dead ends, he stopped. There was a name that had appeared in the very first weeks of the investigation, been looked at, been set aside, and never picked up again. The answer had not been hiding. It had been sitting in that file the entire time. If you are enjoying it, hit the like button and help us bring it to someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more untold cases like Morgan's, subscribe so you never miss one, because these stories deserve to be remembered. Now, let's get back to the case. The file was old, pages soft at the edges, photographs flat and slightly grainy, the way 1995 police documentation looked before everything went digital. Handwritten notes in margins, faded enough that you had to tilt the page toward the light to read them. Lieutenant Brett Hartley had been going through it for hours. Names that led nowhere. Leads that had dissolved. Witnesses who thought they saw something, hoped they saw something, needed to believe they had seen something, and then he stopped. One name near the beginning of the file, from the very first weeks of the investigation, looked at once, set aside, never picked up again. Billy Jack Links. In 1995, Links had been interviewed and released. He was cooperative. He denied any knowledge of Morgan's disappearance. He seemed, by every measure investigators were using at the time, to be telling the truth. There were 1,000 other leads to follow. They moved on. That decision, reasonable in the chaos of 1995, had just cost 24 years. To understand why that name deserved far more attention than it got, you need to understand who Billy Jack Links was. Not the version of him that answered questions calmly in a police interview, the full version. He was born and raised in Crawford County, Arkansas. He served in the United States Army during World War II. He came home, built a life, worked at Braniff Airlines in Dallas, Texas from 1962 to 1974. Steady employment, a regular paycheck, the kind of work history that makes a person look stable on paper. In the late 1970s, he retired and returned to Van Buren, settled back into the River Valley, a neighbor you would wave to, a face you recognized at the gas station. Nothing about him announced what was underneath. But in 1992, it surfaced. He had a prior criminal record involving a minor that had been overlooked. He did not go to prison. A suspended sentence, court-ordered counseling, case processed, filed away, moved on from the way the system moves on when someone appears to comply and causes no further trouble. He was quiet for 3 years. Then, on August 29th, 1995, he woke up and drank a fifth of rum. He drove to the Sonic Drive-In on the corner of 5th and Broadway in Van Buren, 8 miles from Wayford Field, 2 months after Morgan Nick vanished. An 11-year-old girl was standing outside with her 3 brothers and a friend. Just kids on an August afternoon. Links pulled alongside them in his red 1986 Chevrolet pickup and started talking, words that were immediately, unmistakably wrong. He asked the girl if she wanted to talk money. She didn't understand. She asked why. He told her to come closer. She did, but she asked her brothers to stay with her. Links looked at the boys. He reached into his pocket. 4 $1 bills, 1 for each of them. He pressed the money into their hands and told them to leave. They left. Now it was just Links and the girl. He made his offer. She turned and ran back toward the Sonic, screaming for her brothers, screaming for someone to call the police. Links floored the accelerator and left. On his way out, he clipped a telephone pole. The impact scraped a bright smear of red paint onto the pole, a detail so small, so accidental, that he almost certainly never thought about it again. But it stayed there, waiting. A witness caught the plate as the truck fled. They wrote, WJA 385. Officers ran it. No match. One investigator looked again, looked carefully, transposed the last 2 digits. WA 835. That plate came back to a red pickup truck registered to Billy Jack Links, Van Buren, Arkansas. The red paint on the pole matched his truck. He was still intoxicated when they found him. Think about that for a moment. 2 digits, the difference between an 8 and a 3, written down in the wrong order in a moment of confusion. That single transposition had allowed Billy Jack Links to drive away from that Sonic parking lot and stay free. If that witness had written those numbers correctly the first time, investigators would have had his name in his truck within hours of that incident. 2 months after Morgan disappeared, with the case still burning hot, instead of clerical error and 24 more years of silence, Arkansas State Police and the FBI came to interview him about Morgan. He asked for a lawyer immediately. He never said another word about Morgan Nick again. But they searched his truck. Inside that red Chevrolet, the same truck that had been seen near Wayford Field, the same model, the same colour, investigators found what was there. Hair fibres on the seat, on the floorboard, duct tape, a rope, the kind that has no innocent explanation when it is found alongside everything else. A tarp folded in the truck bed large enough to cover almost anything. A sharp-edged tool found hidden inside the vehicle belonging to a man who had just tried to abduct a child. And on one of the seats, significant biological evidence. The State Crime Lab retained the blood for possible future analysis, but the other items, the rope, the tarp, the recovered tool, were processed and stored under the evidence laws that existed in Arkansas in 1995. Laws that did not require agencies to preserve all evidence from attempted kidnapping cases. That legal gap would not be closed until 2011. By then, 16 years had passed. The system had failed Morgan twice now, once in 1995 when Lynx was set aside, and again when the evidence from his truck was not fully preserved. In 1996, Lynx was eventually convicted and sentenced for his prior criminal actions, a 6-year sentence. He went to Tucker Unit Prison and stayed quiet. He never confessed, never gave investigators anything, never said Morgan's name. On August 5th, 2000, Billy Jack Lynx died in his prison cell. Natural causes, he was 75 years old. He had served 4 years of his 6-year sentence. He took everything he knew with him. No confession, no location, no answers, just a death certificate and a closed file. Police had no suspect anymore, no one to question, no one to confront, no one to put in a room and ask, "Where is she? Where did you take her?" All they had was a truck, an old red pickup that had passed from one owner to the next after Lynx's arrest, registered sales, each one documented, each one moving it further from his name. The years added miles and rust and new owners who had no idea what that truck had once carried inside it. It travelled Arkansas roads through summer heat and winter cold, through one decade and into the next, looking like nothing more than what it appeared to be. But in its seams, in the fibres caught in the corners of the truck bed, in places no eye could reach and no hand had ever cleaned, something microscopic remained, something that had survived 25 years of time, weather, and unknowing hands. Lieutenant Hartley closed the file. He made a call, and the question that no one had thought to ask for 2.5 decades was finally, quietly, back on the table. Where is that truck right now? The truck was still running 25 years after Billy Jack Lynx last drove it. 25 years after a 6-year-old girl disappeared into its darkness on a warm Friday night in Arkansas. It had changed hands multiple times, each sale recorded, each new owner completely unaware of what they were purchasing. It had been driven to work, to stores, down ordinary roads through ordinary days, treated like exactly what it appeared to be. Just an old red pickup. Nothing to look twice at. Investigators traced it through the ownership chain, one recorded transfer at a time, until they found the current owner. They explained what they needed. The owner had never heard of Billy Jack Lynx. He had no idea what that truck had once been used for. He said yes without hesitation. Search everything. On July 28, 2020, the FBI Evidence Response Team went through that vehicle the way you work a scene when you truly believe that something survived. They vacuumed every surface, every seam, every corner that no hand had ever reached to clean. The seat, the floorboards, the deep crevices of the truck bed. They collected everything, fibres, particles, matter too small to see. When they finished, they had several vacuum canisters of material, including hair. The FBI took custody, and then nothing happened. Not because the case was abandoned, but because the science didn't exist yet. The hairs recovered from the truck had no roots, shed naturally over time, the way hair falls without being pulled. And in 2020, no available technology could extract a usable DNA profile from rootless hair. Every lab returned the same answer. Insufficient material. Can't be done. So the canister sat in FBI custody through 2021, through 2022 into 2023, 28 years since that parking lot. And the answer sealed inside a container waiting for the world to catch up. In July 2023, Detective Sean Taylor of the Alma Police Department read about a laboratory in the Woodlands, Texas, Orem Labs. What Orem had developed was a technology called kin-snip-peak rapid relationship testing. It could build a complete DNA profile from hair without any root, not by finding what standard testing looked for, but by reading the hair at a molecular depth that made degraded, decades-old material speak again. They had done it before. They had succeeded in cases where everything else had failed. Taylor called them. Then he called the FBI. On September 27, 2023, the evidence left FBI custody and came to Taylor. On December 1st, 2023, he sent it to Texas. The Arkansas State Police provided the funding. Then the waiting began again. 9 months. 9 months. Knowing that somewhere in a lab in Texas, scientists were working on the closest thing to an answer this case had ever produced. Taylor kept working other cases. Colleen kept running the foundation, supporting families, speaking at events, showing up for other people's missing children the way she had shown up for her own for 29 years. 29 years of that, every morning without breaking. On September 27th, 2024, the report arrived. Orem had successfully extracted a DNA profile from one of the recovered hairs. They compared it against the reference sample Colleen had submitted, her own DNA, given so any biological match from her family could be confirmed. First-degree familial relationship. The hair belonged to Colleen or one of her siblings or one of her children. What followed was quiet and methodical and devastating in its simplicity. Investigators spent the next several days interviewing every member of the Nick family. Had any of them ever met Billy Jack Links? Had any of them ever been near his truck? Every answer came back the same. No, never heard of him. Never been in that truck. Colleen, never in that truck. Logan, never in that truck. Taryn, never in that truck. The family had eliminated themselves one by one, and what remained after every no was that silence was the only answer left. One person connected to Colleen's DNA had been inside that truck. She had been 6 years old. October 1st, 2024, Alma Police Department. Chief Jeff Pointer stood at the podium. Journalists, investigators, state officials, and the Nick family sat in a room that had the particular stillness of people who had been waiting a very long time. He laid out the timeline carefully, the truck, the FBI search, the canisters, Orem, the 9 months, the report, the family interviews. Then he said it. For the first time that I am aware of, I am naming Billy Jack Links as the primary individual of interest in this case. One beat of silence. The most important thing here is that Morgan is still missing. Then Colleen Nick walked to the microphone. This was the woman who had closed her business, stood at the White House, driven through the night to Stuttgart, buried every false lead, and kept going. 29 years of choosing every single morning not to stop. She stood there and she spoke without trembling. He stole Morgan from me. He stole her from her dad. He stole her from Logan and Taryn. She paused, not from grief, but from certainty. But he didn't see that he could never win, because our love for Morgan, her memory, her voice, outlasted his life. One final breath. Morgan's heart shines on. Billy Jack Links died in a prison cell in the year 2000. He never confessed. He never gave a location. He took every answer he had to his grave. The case is still open. Morgan is still missing. Somewhere out there is a little girl who chased fireflies on a June evening and never came back. A little girl with blonde hair and silver caps on her teeth who wanted to be a circus performer and a doctor, who read bedtime stories to Logan and Taryn, who picked out her own kitten. She would be 36 years old today. We found the killer's name. We found the truck. We found her DNA. We still haven't found her. And her mother has never, not for one single day, stopped looking. Morgan Nick is still missing. If you have any information, contact the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children at 1-800-THE-LOST. Think about this before you go. A single clerical error 2 digits written in the wrong order in 1995 kept Billy Jack Links free for months after Morgan disappeared. If that witness had written double jar 835 instead of double jar 385, investigators would have had his name within days. Does a mistake that small carry the weight of everything that came after? The truck that carried Morgan was found 25 years later, still running. If any one of those owners had scrapped it for parts, there would be no dar, no match, no answer. The truth survived by pure accident. What does it mean? That justice in this case depended not just on science, but on luck. And the one that stays longest, Morgan Nick, would be 36 years old today. She had dreams. She had a voice. She had a whole life ahead of her in that green Girl Scout shirt. Who would she have become? We will never know. But we know she was loved. And according to her mother, her heart still shines on.